एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासदि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. So thank you very much for doing the recap, Mataji, to remind us where we completed last week. Today we shall continue from text 25 onwards. We'll discuss 3 verses, 25, 26 and 27. The essence is Vishnu, the only deliverer from the cycle of birth and death. So text 25 says, Vejire munayo thagre bhagavantam adhokshacham sattvam vishuddham shemayam kalpante yino taniha. Previously, all the great sages rendered service unto the personality of Godhead due to his existence above the 3 modes of material nature. They worshipped him to become free from material conditions and thus derive the ultimate benefit. Whoever follows such great authorities is also eligible for liberation from the material world. So this is one of the very fundamental and an essential principle why the Vedas prescribe us to worship Lord Vishnu. Bejire. Bejire means to worship or to render service into. So Bejire Munaya, the sages in the past, they did service to the Lord. Bhagavantam Adhokshajam. Adhokshaja means the Lord who is beyond sensual perception. We cannot understand the Lord with our blunt material senses, or even with our mental and intellectual capacity. Therefore, he is called Adhokshaja. So, the purpose of performing the religion is not to profit by material gain. And it's also not to get some knowledge of differentiating matter and the spirit. In fact, Srimad Bhagavatam says, that knowledge which is devoid of Achyuta Bhava Varjitam, the knowledge which is devoid of the Krishna consciousness, in simple words, where there is no consciousness of Achyuta, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. No. That knowledge does not look very good. No. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also, on the similar lines, mentions that in his Shikshashtakam prayer, Vidya Vadhu Jivanam. The Vidya or knowledge is considered or compared to a wife. Now, a woman is considered very fortunate, in Vedic culture especially. Nowadays, people have a very different idea about fortune, but in Vedic culture, a woman is considered very fortunate if she has a husband with her. And of course, husband is also called Pati or Bharta. Nowadays, men are not really, even if they are playing the role of husband, they don't really act in the capacity of Pati. No. Only if a woman has Pati, she's entitled to become Sati. Because Pati means a person who protects the woman, his wife, in all respects and uplifts her consciousness. So that, the living entity engaged in the body of a woman has a better opportunity to go back home, back to Godhead, to stop this repetition of birth and death. That's a real meaning of pati. Bhagavatam also says, pati na sasyat. One should not become pati or a husband if he's na mochai samapayitum mrityum, if he's not capable of delivering his wife from the repetition of birth and death. So that's the meaning of pati. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Vidya Vadhu Jivanam. Vidya is like Vadhu, like wife, and holy name of Krishna is Pati, or the husband of that Vadhu. So if a person is simply interested in getting knowledge, but doesn't take to the chanting of the holy name of Krishna, all his knowledge is like a widow or a woman who is devoid of the husband. Widow generally is not considered a very fortunate condition in Vedic culture. So knowledge which is devoid of Krishna consciousness, which is devoid of the process of hearing and chanting Krishna's glories, that knowledge is simply useless. In fact, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu compares that knowledge to be like the washerman's donkey. Just like washerman's donkey carrying the load takes a lot of load on his back. Similarly, a learned man is no better than a washerman's donkey if he doesn't have Krishna consciousness. The only difference between a donkey and such a learned man is the donkey carries the huge load, useless load, which is not really belonging to him. But he thinks, if I don't carry this load, I won't get any food. Similarly, a learned man who is devoid of Krishna consciousness, he thinks in the same way. If I do not have this education, I cannot maintain myself. In the modern society, human beings are actually being turned into donkeys. Big degrees, PhD, double PhD, triple PhD. People do triple PhD and thinking that the more you learn, the more you earn, which is actually no reality. So they simply become like donkeys. The donkeys carrying the burden, and they are carrying the burden of so much learning on their head without any practical application or utility of it. So that's what is being explained here also. The purpose of performing religion is not to just get some material profit, and it's also not to get simply some knowledge where one can learn to differentiate between matter and spirit. The ultimate aim of all the religious performances is to release oneself from the bondage of cycle of birth and death and attain the eternal life in the transcendental realm, to go back home, back to Godhead, to go to Vaikuntha. That's the aim of performing all our religious duties. And the laws of religion are directly enacted by the Supreme Lord, because the purpose of the religion is to guide the living entity to get out of the cycle of birth and death and go to the spiritual world. It is coming from the Supreme Lord. No one else can actually give the key or guidance how to get out of the cycle of birth and death. Only the Supreme Lord, who is creator of this creation, can give us guidance. So therefore, the true religion is coming from the Supreme Lord only. It's not a man-made religion. Religion is never supposed to be man-made. Just like the laws, any laws in the state or in the country are not meant to be created by ordinary citizens like you and me. Government creates those laws. The king creates those laws. And just like, say for example, traffic laws. We are meant to follow those laws. We cannot create those laws. Somebody already created the laws. So similarly, God is one who gives religion, who gives religious principles. And people who are pure devotees of the Lord, who are in true sense the Mahatmas or Mahajanas, nobody can really understand the purpose of that religion or religious codes. Because even if somebody studies the scriptures, there will be so much confusion. That's what we typically get to see in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita. Arjun was speaking like a learned man. He was offering so many wonderful arguments that why he should not be fighting. If a person has so many wonderful arguments, he should be able to make a decision. If I have strong arguments against something, then I should be able to make decision. But he was not able to decide whether he should or he shouldn't fight. He was in an utterly confused state. And a person who is in confusion and yet speaks as if the learned man, is not really a Mahajan. So Arjuna was playing the role of an ordinary, confused living entity. This is what happens to us. We may have so many wonderful arguments, so many wonderful logics to present, but often in life we get confused. Only a great soul like Mahajan, like Bhishma or Shukdev Goswami, Lord Shiva, Narada Muni, these are the great Mahajans. They can give the true principles of religion. There are total 12 Mahajans which are described in Srimad Bhagavatam. They know the purpose of religion. Swayambhu, Narada, Shambhu, Kumara, Kapilo, Manu, Prahlada, Bhishma, Janako, Balirvaya, Sakhivayam. The 12 Mahajans. So, a person who desire their own good may follow these Mahajans. And by following them, one can attain the perfection of life. And of course, these are the 12 Mahajans which are authorized in Srimad Bhagavatam. But beside that, there are so many other Mahajans. There are so many other Mahajans. Bhagavatam describes there are many other Mahajans. Chaitanya Charitamrita describes so many other Mahajans who are followers of Lord Chaitanya. They're all Mahajans. We get to learn from the lives of such great Mahajans. Srila Prabhupada in modern times is another Mahajan. We can learn from the life of Srila Prabhupada. In fact, if you read Prabhupada Leelamrit, you get to learn the simple principles of Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada's household life was very simple. It's not that he has some extraordinary, facilities and something that we don't have at our advantage. It was just an ordinary, apparently looked like an ordinary human being with all the ordinary responsibilities to the parents, to the children, to wife, to social circle. So this is something very crucial. We can simply follow in the footsteps of Mahajan and attain the supreme destination by going back home, back to God. We'll go to the next slide. Mumukshavo ghora rupan hitva bhutapatin atham narayana kala shantam bhajanti anasuyavam. Those who are serious about liberation are certainly non-envious and they respect all. Yet they reject the horrible and ghastly forms of the demigods and worship only the all blissful forms of Lord Vishnu and his plenary portions. So, here there is another important instruction for people who are seriously interested in going back home, back to Godhead. Those who are seriously interested in making a solution to the problems of life. So, Momokshu. Mokshu means those who are actually aspiring for liberation. Krishna, he expands himself into two categories. Two kinds of expansions Krishna has. One is called Swamshas, and other are called Vibhinamshas. So all the Vishnu forms, like Krishna expanding himself as Balaram, Balaram expanding himself as Vasudev, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, Aniruddha, and then Sankarshan expanding himself further into Narayan, Narayan again expanding himself, and from the Sankarshan, which is the expansion of Narayan, comes Mahavishnu. So in this way, there are so many innumerable expansions of Vishnu, which are coming from Krishna, originally from Krishna. They are all called Swamshas. They are called plenary portions. And we all living entities, we are also expansion of Krishna, but we are Vibhina Amshas. We are separated parts and parcels. So separated parts and parcels, they are servitors. And plenary portions, they are worshipable. They are the object of service by these Vibhina Amshas. So demigods, which are being referred here in this verse, Ghora Rupan, the demigods, they are also separated parts and parcels of Krishna. Only different, they are more empowered than all of us. They are more powerful. They have been invested with Krishna's energies or potencies. So all these separated parts and parcels, no matter how powerful they may appear in our ordinary or mundane people's estimation, they cannot be all powerful. They do not possess unlimited power. None of the demigods can be, in true sense, called all powerful. Only Krishna or the different forms of Vishnu, who are plenary expansions of Krishna, are called all powerful. So to classify or to categorize Vishnu and the ordinary jivas to be in the same category is actually a great blunder that blocks one's spiritual progress. One should never ever think that we ordinary living entities can be equal with Vishnu or Krishna at any point of time. If one does this kind of mistake, immediately one becomes atheistic. He falls in the category of Pashandi. Yastu Narayanam Deva Brahma Rudradi Devatam Samatvena Viksher Sapashandi Bhavedro. It says, anyone who equates Yastu Narayanam Devam, anyone who equates, not to speak of ordinary living entity, but even if somebody equates Yastu Narayanam Devam Brahma Rudradi Devidam, if he equates that, oh, Vishnu, Shiva, Brahma, they all are equal. Even if somebody equates Brahma and Rudra equal to Vishnu, Brahma Rudra Devata, Samatvena, one who speaks like this, Sapashandi Bhave Dhruva, that person at once becomes a Pashandi. Pashandi means an atheist. Just like, take a simple example. If somebody says, it may not be a very apt example, but we can understand from this. If somebody says, the President of United States and I, ordinary person, for example, I, Shankarananda, and President of United States, we are all equal. In one way, yes, we may be equal because we are, citizens. We have equal rights. But to say that we are equal in all respects is actually a great blunder. It's a great disrespect. It's not only disrespect to the president, but it's also disrespect to one's own self. It's like overestimating one's own abilities or position. So such a person is definitely called crazy. One who says, "Oh, there is no difference between me and the president of United States." So definitely. So similarly, a person who equates ordinary living entities or even the great demigods with Vishnu or Narayan or Krishna, that person is called atheist. Atheist means non-believer. He may be visiting the temples. He may be going and bowing down to the temple, giving charity, and even worshipping the different devas or even Vishnu at the home. But that person is in the category of an atheist. So there are different demigods, which are, Prabhupada actually mentions Bhairava, Kal Bhairava, which is another form of Lord Shiva. Shamshan Bhairava. Shamshan Bhairava is another form of, Mahadev. Shaneshwara, Shaneshwara is considered another demigod, which is considered very inauspicious. And people are afraid of Shaneshwara, Shanidev. Then Bhadrakali or Mahakali, Chandika. These are the different forms of Durga Devi. So people who are generally in the lower modes, they are afflicted by the modes of material nature, especially the darker modes of material nature, the ignorance. They are generally attracted to worship such forms of the Lord. And then there are people who worship Brahma, Shiva, Surya, Ganesh, or many other, deities like Durga. They, are people in the mode of passion. They have unlimited desires and they want to fulfill those desires. And for sake of fulfilling those desires, they worship these different deities. And people who are actually in the mode of goodness, they get attracted to worship Vishnu Tattvas like Narayan, Vaman, Damodar, Krishna, Rama, Adhokshaja. These are different forms of Lord Vishnu or Krishna. So people in Sattva-guna only get attracted to worship them, these forms. In Vedic culture, all the qualified Brahmanas, they worshipped Lord Vishnu. In fact, every Brahmana used to have a Shaligram Shila in their home. And even the Kshatriyas, who are actually high-class Kshatriyas, as well as Vaishyas, they generally used to worship Vishnu. Only the, sometimes Shudras and outcasts, they would worship the different Ghora Rupas, like Tantrics and all. They would worship the different Ghora Rupas. They were never considered the part of Vedic culture. So Brahmanas who used to worship Vishnu, they generally were situated in the mode of goodness, and they never held any grudge against others. Even if somebody worshipped the different demigods, or even if they worship some bhuta pretas and pishachas, the Brahmanas would never hold any grudge against them. This was actually one of the principles. Now, how all the Mlechas and Yavanas, they invaded They invaded Bharatavarsha because they would welcome everyone. Doesn't matter what form the person worship. They understand that everybody part and parcel of Krishna, and they would actually, welcome every living entity. Doesn't matter what their belief or background in the religious practice must be, because Brahmanas especially, they know that even these horrible features of the different devas like Kali or Bhairava, these are nothing but the servitors of the Lord. They are fulfilling different purpose of the law. They also have some purpose. They are meant to serve the Lord in a particular way. But none of these forms, including even Brahma and Shiva, generally, can offer liberation. Of course, some place will find that Lord Shiva does offer liberation. But this explanation is given by the Vaishnava Acharya that there's also a reference in the Puranas. How does Lord Shiva offers liberation to different living entities? Especially if somebody dies in Kashi, it is said, if somebody leaves the body in the Kashi, is guaranteed of liberation. Because it is said, Lord Shiva, Lord Mahadev, personally goes and utters the name of Lord Ram in the ears of the person who's dying in Kashi. And that's how he offers liberation. So ordinarily, demigods cannot award liberation to their worshippers because they themselves are not liberated. They themselves are under the clutches of law of nature. Even as great as Indra, even Indra is under the influence of illusory energy. That's why sometimes he gets bewildered. He gets bewildered and desires to have union with some sage's wife, or becomes bewildered and wants to break the tapasya or austerities of some sages. So even the great demigods, even Brahma gets bewildered at times. So how can they actually offer freedom from the influence of material nature? He said, in order to free someone, we should also be free. Only a person who is free can offer freedom to others. If I'm myself bound, my hands and legs, they're all bound with the ropes or chains, how can I free anyone else? So only Vishnu, Mukti Pradata Sarvesha, Vishnu eva na samshaya. Mukti is offered only by Vishnu. There is no doubt about it. We go to next verse, text 27. Rajastama prakritya samashila bhajanti vai pitirbhuta prajeshadin shriyeshwar shriyeshwarya prajepsava. Those who are in the modes of passion and ignorance worship those in the same category, namely forefathers, other living beings, and demigods who are in charge of cosmic activities. For they are urged by the desire to be materially benefited with women, wealth, power, and progeny. So, this is actually the very significant instruction here. Of course, we have to understand the proper context of it. Many times, people who are practicing Krishna consciousness, they tend to neglect their duties in the name of practicing devotional service. Demigod worship not required if one is serious about the the his goal of going back home, back to Godhead. And we should always remember, demigod worship is not forbidden. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna does not forbid to worship demigods. He condemns worshipping of demigods. So if somebody is worshipping demigod, it's not forbidden. He's still following the Vedic principles. But Krishna says, Tad bhavati alpamedasa. Those who have little intelligence or less brain substance. In other words, those who are foolish, they worship demigods. So demigod worship is not forbidden, but it's condemned in Bhagavad Gita. And generally people who are too much possessive of material desires, they generally take to such worship. So Bhagavad Dharma does not promote one to increase the material enjoyment. So as we are reading in this verse, says those who are in the mode of passion and ignorance, they generally get attracted to worshipping different demigods. Like, this Pitta Paksha is going on. So we have certain responsibility to be offering, Tarpan or Shraddha or some offerings to the ancestors. Now, it's not that just because, I'm worshipping Krishna, therefore I can neglect, because this is also considered one of the duties of every human being. Vaishnavas also fall in the category of human beings. Practicing Vaishnavas, especially sadhakas, we also fall in the category of human beings. So human beings have certain duties, certain responsibilities. But a devotee, especially a sadhaka, he follows all the rules and regulations, keeping Krishna in the center. So I don't want to offer, Shraddha to Pitris or Tarpan to my ancestors because I want to get their blessing so that I can have good money. I should have good wife and children. I should have happy family life. No, that's not the aim why a sadhaka may do perform his responsibilities. Especially a sadhaka or a devotee, when performing Shraddha, offers the Vishnu Prasada to his ancestors. We see even from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Advaita Acharya, a very close associate of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is actually incarnation of Sadashiv. He is Vishnu. He is in the category of Vishnu, Vishnu Tattva. He used to perform Shraddha ceremony. Because the devotee, or especially a practicing devotee, understands when I am performing Shraddha and offering the prasad of Vishnu to my ancestors, they will also become Krishna conscious. They will be relieved from all the sinful reactions and their life of Krishna consciousness will begin. So they are on the way back home, back to Godhead. And a devotee is always eager to help everyone to go back home, back to Godhead. So with this consciousness, a devotee performs Shraddha or all the other worships, his prescribed duties. Of course, when a person rises to transcendental plane, he doesn't even have to perform all these different duties. The simple gesture of a person's remembrance of Krishna delivers all his innumerable ancestors. So worshipping especially Krishna can, not only benefit the person who's engaged in worshipping Krishna, but all his family members as well. And even if somebody do have material desires, enjoyment, they don't have to still worship different demigods. Bhagavatam says, Akama sarva kamo moksha kamo daradi tivrena bhakti yogena yajeta purushapara. Whether a person is akama means has no desires for worldly enjoyment. Akama sarva kamo, or if he has all the worldly desires. Another meaning of sarva kama is also, sarva kama means also Krishna. So a person who desires to have Krishna doesn't want to have anything of this world, because Krishna includes everything. So a person who desires Krishna, akama sarva kamo moksha kama. If a person is interested in liberation, if he is udaradhi, if he is really intelligent, what he will do? Tivrena bhakti yogena, with intense, tivra means intense devotional service. Tivrena bhakti yogena, with intense devotional service, yajeta purusha param. He will worship Krishna. So even if somebody has desires, worldly desires to enjoy, still doesn't have to go and worship different demigods. He can ask from Krishna. But when a devotee does perform his duties, it's mainly to deliver or help other living entities to become Krishna conscious. Worshipping demigods for material gain, Krishna condemns in Bhagavad Gita, and Srimad Bhagavatam also condemns it. Dharma projata kaitava. The word kaitava is used in this word, and it's used in the terms of dharma. Dharma projita kaitava. So kaitava means cheating. So kaitava dharma, the so-called worship of different demigods for the purpose of getting some sense enjoyment or some facility for sense enjoyment, is actually referred in Srimad Bhagavatam as kaitava dharma, a cheating religion. And that has been kicked out from Srimad Bhagavatam. In the very beginning, Bhagavatam kicks out all the kaitava dharma. So one does not worship different demigods for the sake of getting some benefit from them for sense enjoyment. Bhagavad Dharma is the only true religion to be followed. And what is the meaning of Bhagavad Dharma? Bhagavad Dharma means a person who lives his life as per Srimad Bhagavatam. That's called Bhagavad Dharma. So in simple words, what Prabhupada has given us, the lifestyle of a devotee, that is nothing but Bhagavad Dharma. So every day chanting the holy names of Krishna is one of the very crucial principles of Bhagavad Dharma. Worshipping deity in our home is another very important aspect of Bhagavad Dharma. Reading literature like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam is also a very important limb of Bhagavad Dharma. Eating Krishna Prasad is part of Bhagavad Dharma. Distributing Krishna Prasad is part of Bhagavad Dharma. Distributing literatures like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam is also part of Bhagavad Dharma. These are the activities one can actively engage in the principles of Bhagavad Dharma. And then refraining from certain things, like, killing of animals for the sake of eating, or avoiding any foodstuffs which drag one's consciousness down. The foods, especially in the mode of ignorance and passion, like meat. So to be avoided, avoiding, any form of intoxication, avoiding the sexual affairs outside of marriage life, or engaging any kinds of gambling. These are all principles of Bhagavad Dharma. So if one is really interested in going back home, back to Godhead, one should follow the principles of Bhagavad Dharma and give up the worship of all the different Ghora Rupas. And of course, Ghora Rupa doesn't mean only worship of demigods or higher beings. Even what we in this world is thinking that, oh, if I somehow praise this person, flatter this person, then I'll get my what do you call gain. That's also nothing but a form of worship. In fact, Shukdev Goswami, the second canto of Bhagavatam says, that is there not sufficient arrangement by the Supreme Lord in the nature that provides everyone? Is it that the rivers do not give us sufficient water? Is it that the trees don't offer fruits and roots by which we can satisfy our hunger? Is it that there's no sufficient clothing for a person? Is it that the person doesn't have, his own arms to use as a pillow? If nature's arrangement, Krishna has provided ample for everyone, why should especially saintly people who are interested in attaining perfection of life, of going back home, back to God, they should go to the homes of so-called rich people to flatter them, or going to a politician to flatter them, to get their job done? So worship should be done only for the sake of satisfying Vishnu or Krishna. That is the underlying principle of Bhagavad Dharma. So I think we'll stop here. If anyone has any questions, you may ask.